So my first question is, and maybe Evelyn can take a poll. How many of you had a course in civics in high school or college? Not worked into your American history class, but a separate course.
You guys are welcome to raise your hand because I'm not set up for a poll right now. If you just raise your hand, if she can see that one, that would be great.
Okay, not too many. Okay, that's what I thought. So we are gonna cover the basics here of the structure of our government, which is really not very well understood by many people in the country. And in order to talk about our government, I want to first of all reference Trump's ambitions. Trump wants to be a dictator. He wants to be like Viktor Orban or Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong Un. In other words, all the power in one person. What the laws are, when they've been broken, what should be done. Everything in one person. Kings in medieval times had that power. They were absolute monarchs. But we go back to Great Britain in the 18th century, and they did not have an absolute monarch. They had a constitutional monarch. Our beef was that we were not represented in Parliament, which is where they made the laws. So we had a revolution, and while we were fighting the revolution, we had something called the Articles of Confederation. Now, somebody called attention to a statement in the preamble, which says, in order to make a more perfect union. Well, the more perfect union that they're referring to was the Articles of Confederation, which left a little bit to be desired. The articles had very limited taxing power. You could only tax this product, that product, no general sales tax, no income tax, no corporate tax, with the result that the government didn't have much money. With the result that the revolutionary soldiers returning home to their farms didn't get paid. And the governments and the local governments also didn't have enough money, so they thought they would impose a high tax. So the revolutionary soldiers didn't think that was all right, so they staged a rebellion. That's Shays' Rebellion. But the colonies, under the states rather, at that time, the states didn't have enough money to raise an army to put down the rebellion. So that is the union we had before. And the one we've got now is, quote, more perfect. You see where we're coming from? We're sort of evolving in what the structure of government is. So basically, our Constitution, as you know, has three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. And they interact. For example, if the president doesn't behave, he can be impeached. If Congress passes a law that's unconstitutional, it can be overturned by the judiciary. If the judiciary gets out of line, well, one thing that happened when Franklin D. Roosevelt was passing the New Deal is that the very conservative Supreme Court struck down all the laws that he passed. So Roosevelt said, well, gosh, the 9 justices now, but previously there were 5, and then there were 7, and why don't we have 13? And when the Supreme Court heard that, they said, oh, well, maybe we were wrong. And they started validating the New Deal laws. So that overcame that little crisis. So let's go through the legislative and executive and judicial branches and see what's actually going on. The legislative branch is known as Congress. Now, you often refer to your congressman, by which you mean your representative. There are 2 houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. So, properly speaking, Congress is both of them, but we often speak of Congress, of the House of Representatives, as Congress. So, the function of the legislative branch is to make laws. Certain laws, like budget laws, raising money and taxing, must originate in the House of Representatives, and that's in the Constitution. And the reason is that they're elected every 2 years, and so they're considered closer to the will of the people, namely the willingness to be taxed. But all other bills can originate in either house. Let me go through some of the other powers, and then I'll go through the process of passing enacting legislation. Another thing that the Congress can do, if the president vetoes a bill passed by Congress, Congress can override it by a veto of 2/3 of both the House and the Senate. Another thing that the Senate does is approve presidential appointments and treaties. And the presidential appointments they're talking about are all judges, Supreme Court, but also district and appellate, and as well as some other key government officials, ambassadors, and things like that. The Senate also has the power to approve or reject treaties that the president signs. The president is the one who negotiates and signs the treaties. Congress also has, in the course of its ability to pass laws, the right to hold hearings and investigations, and those can be very important. They can gather information, they can be used to hold people accountable, and they can shape public policy if they cover a broad area. For example, that happened with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and one of the organizing things I did developed the factual basis for the Voting Rights of 1965. So the hearings and investigations is a very important power. The House of Representatives has the power to impeach federal officials, including the president and other key officials. If they're impeached, then the Senate holds the trial to determine whether to remove them from office, which very seldom happens, but it has happened a couple of times. And then we were going to talk about the budget some more. And then the power to declare war belongs exclusively to the legislative branch. The president cannot start a war, but there are some laws that permit him to send troops to various places. And that's how we've gotten into most of the quote wars that we've been in since the Civil War. They've all been done not as a declaration of war, but as Korea was a police action. They have different terms. Okay, so how does a bill become law? What's the process? Well, the process starts with somebody's good idea. And that percolates up from the people, or it can originate with a legislator. And so the first thing they do is they draft the bill. Now, that is done with the congressional, what is it called? There is an office that is part of Congress, which has people who are expert in drafting legislation. So that's how it gets to be in good form, because face it, most of the legislators wouldn't know how to draft something that would actually accomplish what they wanted to do. Anyway, once it's drafted, it gets debated in the House or the Senate, and they hold hearings. No, sorry, the hearings come after they're sent to a committee, and they're sent to a committee by subject. And so presumably your legislator is assigned to a committee that's relevant to their district. But that doesn't always happen. For example, Shirley Chisholm, the first Black representative who represented Brooklyn, was assigned to the Agriculture Committee, which caused a little bit of an uproar. And eventually she was assigned to something that had much more relevance to Brooklyn. But anyway, that's the theory. And those committee assignments are very contentious. I mean, people really want to get into particular committees. And some committees have more powers and more prestige than others. So in the committee, they hold hearings. Then it is hopefully voted out of committee, but most laws die in committee. It then goes to the House where it is debated, then voted on, possibly amended. Then we're talking about something that originates in the House of Representatives here. Then it would go to the Senate, where again, it's debated, possibly amended, probably dies. And then it goes back to the House again, which can accept what is probably a different bill than the one they sent over. It's probably been amended substantially. And the House has to agree to what the Senate did to it. And when they agree, it goes back and forth until there's a resolution. And then the bill and that is called the reconciliation process. And then it is sent to the president, who can sign it or veto it. And as I said, the veto can be overridden by 2/3 of the Congress. There is something in the Senate that you should know about, and you probably do know about, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about it. And that's the filibuster. The filibuster is not in the Constitution. When in the beginning, there was no limit on how long speakers could vote, and they used their best judgment, and there were no problems. Then, around the time of Andrew Jackson in the 1830s, some of the senators discovered that, gosh, if they talked long enough, nothing would get done until people agreed to what they wanted. And so that was the beginning of the filibuster. And then that was very seldom used in the 19th century, but it began to be used more often in the early 20th century. And so there was something called closure, Cloture, which is pronounced closure, like closing a door. Closure just draws an end to the debate. That's all it does. It just means no more debate. Now we're going to vote. Closure in 1917 was by 2/3 of the Senate. In 1975, it still was pretty much out of hand. And so they made closure happen at 60 votes. And it was the filibuster that Senator Booker was using a few weeks ago in that wonderful set of speeches that he gave. Historically, the filibuster was used primarily to block civil rights legislation that the North would want and the South would not. It also got to be used in more recent times to block nominations to the Supreme Court, but that was prevented by a law in 2013, which says you can't use it to block nominations to the Supreme Court. So any questions about the legislature? Okay, so I'll go on to the executive. I've got quite a lot to talk about. I'm going to go through the executive, and then I could go through executive orders and a few other things. But I want to get to some of the questions that you all raised. So let's talk about what the executive branch does. The president is the commander in chief. The president negotiates treaties, appoints judges, which are confirmed by the Senate. The president, under the Constitution, has a duty to give a State of the Union message. The president can issue executive orders, and I have quite a bit to say about that later on. The president presides over what are now 15 departments. Originally, if you can think about it, back in 1889, there were 5 departments, and I bet you can imagine what they were. A Department of State for negotiating with other countries, a Department of War, a Department of the Treasury to get those taxes, and an Attorney General. Legal problems come up all the time, and the post office. The post office was a revolutionary thing and very important to the colonies. There are now 15 executive departments. I'm just going to go through them just so that you hear them. They are agriculture, commerce, defense, education, energy, health and human services, homeland security, housing and urban development, interior, justice, which is supposed to be independent of politics and has been historically up until the current administration. A Department of Labor, the Department of State, which I mentioned before, the Department of Transportation, which is our not only that's air travel and the interstate highway system and mass transit, a Department of the Treasury, and a Department of Veterans Affairs. So that sets up the executive in the Constitution with the current departments. Now, the other thing you need to know about the Constitution is that it has amendments. And the first 10 amendments were enacted because some of the people who signed the Constitution said, we won't sign unless you give us a Bill of Rights so we have protection for the people. And so that's what they did. They enacted a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights, the amendments go into several categories. There's the Bill of Rights. There's the rights that are not enumerated. There's some rights that have to do with government authority. There are civil rights amendments. And then the others are sort of process and procedure. So let's just look at the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, the first 3 are liberty safeguards. There's the Establishment Clause. Sorry, we're not going to become a Christian country. There is also the 5 freedoms. I wonder if you know what they are. They're speech, press, religion, the right to assemble or hold a demonstration, and petition. And those are absolute. They are in the Bill of Rights and we're guaranteed them. There is also in the Second Amendment a right to bear arms, which was originally intended to provide for state militias. But of course, it's been twisted all out of shape by recent history. And then the Third Amendment has to do with the quartering of troops, because there was a problem when we were in the colonies where Britain would just grab somebody's house and say, hey, you now have to put up our 15 soldiers. And the colonists did not like that. So they were afraid that the federal government might do that too. So there's an amendment that you can't quarter troops in people's houses without their permission. Then the next 4 amendments in the Bill of Rights have to do with justice. The 4th Amendment is the protection against unreasonable search and seizure. Then the 5th Amendment gives you, in criminal cases, a grand jury, the right to due process, and just compensation for being deprived of property. So the government can't say, gee, I'd like to put a road there and just put it there. They have to give you a reasonable value for the land that they're taking. But by the same token, you can't say, no, your road can't go here. This is my farm. The 6th Amendment gives you it gives you a fair and speedy trial. The 7th Amendment gives you the right to a jury in civil cases and some other rights. The 8th Amendment gives you the right to a reasonable bail. So you can't set bail at $1 million. Unless, of course, it's Elon Musk. Then the 9th Amendment is reserved and covers sort of miscellaneous things like the right to travel. An important right, the right to privacy, is in the 9th Amendment. The right to vote is in the 9th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that anything we didn't mention before belongs to the states or the people. So that would be areas like family relations, local law, abortion now, housing law, motor vehicle law, property laws. That's all excluded from, that's all in the hands of the states or the people, not the federal government. So then the government authority amendments are 11, 16, 18, and 21. And that's the income tax, which is a very important provision, as you know, and prohibition and repeal of prohibition. Then the civil rights amendments are 13, 14, and 15, which are called the Civil War amendments because they were enacted right after the Civil War and passed the legislatures very quickly. And that abolishes slavery. It says Black men can vote. And it gives you substantive due process, which is the broader concept of due process that we have, not just in a trial, but, well, it used to give us a right to abortion, but it gives us privacy rights now. Then the 19th Amendment, another civil rights amendment, was the women's right to vote. The 23rd Amendment gave the District of Columbia the right to vote. They couldn't vote before that. The 24th Amendment eliminated the poll tax, which was a way of keeping Black people from voting. Because I didn't mention this, but after the Civil War and Black people got the right to vote, the South enacted a zillion laws making life more difficult, like segregation, black water fountains, white water fountains, black swimming pool, no black swimming pools. Swimming pools were whites only. All of those laws. And one of them was a very high, well, too high for most Black people to pay tax to vote. So can't have a poll tax now. And then the 26th Amendment gives the right to vote to 18-year-olds. So that takes care of the Constitution. Now, somebody asked a question about voting laws. Voting laws are federal, state, and local, and they're pretty complex. Where are we doing on time? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, Mary, I was trying to get on unmute. We have it's just 12:34 and we have basically have about less than an hour, but you have enough time. If you want to take some of the questions now, that might be a good time to pause now if you'd like.
Well, what I'm picking up on are the questions that were sent in, and they were good questions. So I'd like to get to them. Is that okay?
Absolutely, 100%, please.
Okay. So one was about voting laws, which are really quite complex in the country. The problem most often mentioned is voter fraud, as you know. And as I'm sure you know, there is like 0.1% of voter fraud in the United States. It's a non-existent problem. It's been studied. It's 0.1. But there are lots of laws governing voting, and most of them are restricting voting, and most of them are designed to restrict how poor people or Black people can vote by characteristics that poor people and Black people share. So that's the problem with the voting. That's our main bottom issue with voting laws. So the federal, state, and local laws that govern voting, let's take the federal laws. The federal law says that every eligible US citizen has a right to vote. It focuses on preventing discrimination and ensuring equal access to the ballot box. The Voting Rights of 1965, which is the thing I had some role in doing the work that became the factual basis for it, prohibits voter discrimination based on race, color, or membership in a language minority group. It also includes provisions for language assistance in some jurisdictions. And it required, since the suppression of voting in the South was so severe, it required that any changes to the election laws with a history of discrimination had to be approved before they would go into effect. But that provision was struck down in 2013. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has very little teeth now. Then there is voting accessibility for elderly and handicapped. That's 1984. There is uniformed voting and overseas absentee voting for military and people who are overseas. That's 1986 and 2009. Then there is another thing intended to expand voting, and it really did, which was the Motor Voter Act in 1993. And that allows state governments to register voters as they are getting their driver's license or as they're getting any other public assistance. Whatever the state wants to provide, they can provide through the Motor Voter Act. Then the next development is the Help America Vote Act of 2002, which gives federal funding for elections and establishes the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, which helps the state implement minimum standards for voter education, registration, and ballots. And then federal law also establishes a uniform election day, which is, as you know, the Tuesday after the first Monday in November in even numbered years. And there are federal laws prohibiting non-citizens. We do not need more laws. Then there are the state laws. States have significant authority in regulating elections. They govern things like voter registration, how to register, who can register, how long they have to have been in their county or town, when they can register, maintaining voter rolls, early voting. That's all state voting law. Voter ID requirements vary by state. In New Jersey, you do have to show an ID when you register to vote, but that's the last time. You don't have to show it every time you vote. Other states have it that you have to show it every time you vote. Then absentee and mail-in voting are established by states, and that varies widely from state to state. Polling place operations, ballot design, election administration are all state law. Some states like California, Connecticut, Illinois, Oregon have their own voting rights acts to provide additional protections against voter suppression. They have a more limited role, but they are the nuts and bolts of how the voting is taking place. They manage the poll places, they train the poll workers, they recruit the poll workers, they distribute and collect the ballots, they maintain the voter registration information, they conduct local elections, they design the ballot, which is a big issue in New Jersey right now. So all of these things interact. Okay, any questions about voting? Okay. So then somebody else asked about how do I know what's state law and what's local law? So state law is the authority of a state government to enact and enforce laws within its boundaries. Local law refers to its boundaries. State law covers criminal cases. Most criminal cases are state cases. Traffic violations, family law, property law, real estate law, those are all state laws. Then local laws are just for the city or town, and they are ordinances that have to do with local matters like zoning, parking, local services, and things like that. Sometimes those things overlap, and their state has oversight over the relations between the two. So there's separate legal frameworks, and the state laws are enforced by state agencies, and local laws by local enforcement. So somebody also asked about public schools. How am I doing here? Everything okay? I don't know if you're bored silly or you're interested.
You're on track, Mary, but we do have a question though from John Cavalunas, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Mary, on the local and state laws, how does preemption work and does it vary by state? Because I've been aware of instances like in Florida, for example, where the state has tried to prevent environmental laws from local counties. Do they have that right, and does it vary from state to state? Could you help me understand that?
Yeah, that is strictly a matter of state law. That's in the state constitution if they have a right to preempt local law. But it would be intrinsic, it's within their power. They just, different states may or may not have that, or may not use that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So,
Are there other questions before Mary continues? Okay, Mary.
okay, so let's talk about public schools. Well, you might think if you're a property owner that you're the only one paying for public schools, but you're not. The federal government pays some money, the state government pays some money, and there is federal, state, and local law governing public schools. And they all interact. Basically, the federal government sets some national standards and provides some funding. The states primarily establish and operate their own school system, and the local school districts manage daily operations. So, under federal law, they guarantee equal access and prohibit discrimination, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, it's called, which ensures equal education opportunities. The federal government also provides financial assistance through various programs and grants, which can be used to support special ed or Title I for disadvantaged students or other initiatives. And they also have some national standards. The state is the primary one that sets national standard and accountability. State law is the primary thing going on above the local, which governs the actual administration of schools. State law establishes and operates the school systems, sets curriculum standards and teacher certification requirements and funding formulas. For example, in New Jersey, our situation is that richer school districts get a little bit less funding, and what they don't get is given to poorer school districts, which of course bothers the richer school districts, but that's what we do to make things come out even, because the property taxes in poor districts are not enough to really provide good education. And also in poor school districts, there is more need for remedial things and other additional educational functions. So that's how we even it out in New Jersey. Let's see. The state also supervises the local school districts to be sure they're complying with state laws, that kind of thing. Then day-to-day operations are controlled by the city or town, by the school boards, which are elected by the town. And that includes curriculum implementation. Some of the curriculum has been set by the federal and by the state, but the rest of the curriculum is decided by the town. They also hire teachers, they manage the budget, they implement the state and local laws, and they address local needs according to specific things and the demographics in their town. So there's more on that. In all of this, federal law is paramount, of course, under the supremacy clause of the Constitution. But states have flexibility in how they implement and interpret those laws. And local districts are autonomous in managing day-to-day operations. They just have to comply with state and federal laws. To give you some examples, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Acts mandates special ed for students with disabilities. States determine eligibility criteria and service models and compliance procedures. States specify the minimum number of school days each year. Local school districts determine which days those are. So there may be a break for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in one area, but not in an area where there are virtually no Jewish population. And also local districts can do dress codes, student discipline, just as long as they conform with state and federal law. Okay, so that's the basic state, federal, and town organization. But then there are some things that our fearless or fearful leader is doing, which are constitutional issues, which might be worth talking about. And I chose some that you may or may not want to hear about. One is the executive orders, where he's gone completely haywire. Another is his attempt to threaten to fire, for example, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. And that is an appointment that is a 10-year appointment. It is designed to be independent of the political aspirations of whoever happens to be president. And there are limitations on to the extent to which he can do that. He can fire his own Secretary of State, but when it comes to the commissions and agencies, they are often protected, and the Federal Reserve is protected. And the other question, which is really right up top right now, is what happens if Trump defies court orders? So for all these things, I'd like to know what you would want me to talk about. Or do you want me to do all of them if I can?
Do as many as you can, Mary. It's a very difficult question based on the climate that we're in today, but I think it needs a response, if you don't mind, please.
Okay, do you want me to start with defying court orders or firing agency heads or executive orders?
Define court orders right now.
Yes.
The defying court orders? Okay.
Yes. John, I see you
Okay.
have a question shortly.
Okay. You know, there's a lot of stuff wrong about the way Trump is managing the government right now. And I can think of two main things. One is defying court orders. The other is defunding government departments. Those departments were set up by Congress, authorized by Congress, charged with particular duties by Congress. And if he defunds part of them, he changes what Congress has done. And that's a conflict. Because he's going beyond his authority. So, but let's take what happens when he flat out defies court orders. And there have been, I think, 242 cases filed against Trump on a constitutional basis since he took office. And I can't think of one from Biden's office. So, let me see. So this the first thing he did was the end of birthright citizenship. Well, that's in the Constitution. It's ridiculous that you could have an end to birthright citizenship. And then freezing funding to crucial programs, gutting the federal workforce, the first step in the grand plan to remake the American government into an authoritarian regime. So far, the courts have consistently ruled against the Trump administration. Federal judges have blocked the White House federal funding freeze, the birthright executive order, and the Department of Government Efficiency access to sensitive information in key agencies have been blocked by federal judges. That's a win, not just for democracy, but for the constitutional laws that establish the system of checks and balances that ensures that the executive branch doesn't just take over with impunity. And that's the essential problem. But these series of court orders have seriously irked Trump and his administration. And the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, rescinded its initial memo indicating a freeze in federal funds following a pair of lawsuits. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt tried to assert otherwise in a post on X that spectacularly backfired. And after a federal judge blocked Doge's access to sensitive Treasury information, Elon Musk fumed on X, quote, a corrupt judge protecting corruption. He wrote, he needs to be impeached now. So even Vice President J.D. Vance chimed in on X, posting an inaccurate but ominous statement about court orders. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power, he said. Well, that's just flat out not true. All of this is teeing up to what some people feel is a constitutional crisis. And whether or not the Trump administration knows that these orders are unlawful is beside the point. It's clear that, court order or not, the White House is going to fight to keep these policies in place. But if the administration chooses to defy court orders in order to protect their policies, what happens next? Well, the fundamental answer is that we don't really know. Azik Hook, a constitutional law scholar at the University of Chicago Law School, has made that opinion, and that's certainly my opinion too. He says there have been moments when there have been some level of defiance on nonconformist to judicial orders in the past, like the aftermath of Brown versus Board of Education, which integrated schools, and many states for years defied the ruling. But even then, that was a case of the state opposing the federal government rather than the federal government defying the courts. There are mechanisms in place for defying a court order, like fines and holding the offending parties in contempt. But because of the US Supreme Court's landmark ruling last year, the president is likely immune from criminal prosecution for official acts. So there is some people say they're not so worried about it. Kristen Hickman, a professor of administrative law at the University of Minnesota Law School, said, we're not in a crisis yet. We have no guarantee that we're ever going to get there. It's not healthy for our body politic to overreact, and roll around a lot of overheated rhetoric. Well, I don't know about that. I think it is a crisis. The White House itself is calling the situation a crisis because judges are ruling against the administration. They're saying these judges are acting as judicial activists rather than honest arbiters of the law. People are also, let's see. What do I want to say about that? People, once you have the president saying, well, I don't need to follow a court order, what about governors? What about sheriffs? What about state legislatures or state judges? What do they need to do? And as with many things that the Trump administration does, I don't think they thought through their actions and the way that it opens to a lot more. This has been going on, as you know, from the get-go, and it's largely mapped out in the Project 2025 orders. Doge is facing mounting legal challenges. The base I'm going to leave, I have some notes here that are not helping me. So the basic problem is that the courts only have the sheriff to enforce the law. And the sheriff is executive.
Mary,
So,
can we pause and take a couple of questions from the chat now?
yeah.
Okay. So there's the first one is a comment basically from Aganita. And maybe we'll do this at another time, but she says, I hope to hear more about how the administration is ignoring much of what Mary Stevens is talking about and breaking these laws. Can you address that?
She wants to hear more about
how right now the administration is actually ignoring what you're talking about.
That's right.
Yeah. So what can we, I'm not sure if she wants to know what can be done, but maybe it was just a comment.
Well, I think what can be done is demonstrations. I think pressure. I think public opinion. I mean, we've run out of legal remedies. I don't say we've run out of legal remedies, but the legal remedies have limits. And public opinion does not have limits. And disobedience does not have limits.
Thank you for that response. And then Kenneth also asked, he says, given the Bill of Rights, how can the police detain you for 48 hours in Texas specifically without arresting or charging you?
That depends on Texas rules about how quickly you have to be charged.
Okay, thank you. And I think you answered Agnetha's other question too. She said, sadly, the administration is ignoring some of those judicial decisions. What should we do? What should happen next? And I think you've already responded to that one by saying we've got to continue public facing.
Yeah.
And then Kenneth said, I would love for him to explain, for you to explain the line Trump needs to cross to make it a crisis in his opinion. Would he even think that way, that it's a crisis though?
Well, I think it is a crisis. I think we are at a crisis.
But for him, it's not a crisis though.
For Trump, it's not a crisis?
No.
That's right. So we need to put his feet to the fire.
Now, I was mentioning the judge or the maybe professor she referred to who was saying it was not a crisis. And what he would, it seems 10 times over that it's a crisis. And I would love to hear And that's a question for him, I suppose, really, is, what line has Trump not crossed that he needs to cross that he would say, oh yeah, that's a crisis now.
Mhm. I understand now. Okay, and Casey, what you want to come off mute, Casey, and just address that with yourself?
Yeah, it was kind of just stream of consciousness, but I was saying, I think it was on Friday when they arrested the immigration judge, that seemed to me to be a significant escalation. More of a comment, I guess.
Oh, it is. It is a significant escalation. And I don't know what would be next. Could some arm of the Congress condemn that? Public opinion is certainly condemning it. I mean, this is uncharted territory. Nobody has ever done what Trump is doing. So it's new to everybody.
Mhm.
I was just gonna add on that it seems like the only thing that's had, and I wonder if you agree, but that's had any luck in slowing him down has been, protest and public opinion. Wonder if you agree.
I think that's most of it. There are some tools that that can be brought to bear. I don't know all of them. I don't know who would have the authority to object to a judge being arrested. Maybe somebody within the judiciary, but it's never happened before.
Hey, John.
I have a comment. When the insurrection happened, it's that afterwards there was a story, I don't know if it was New York Times where I read that a couple of the generals, chief of staff generals, said within hours they were ready to step in if Trump had not finally gone in and told, come out and have people to back off. Are we at that point where we've got to have a military, I won't call it even a coup, or effectively an implementation of Trump to obey the law? I mean, ultimately, if he defies everything else, is that where we're at?
That would have been a safety if Trump had not fired the top brass. But whether there is enough resistance in the military now, maybe from the lower ranks, I don't know.
Mhm.
But that's certainly, yeah, that's exactly where it would go.
And Agnetha just has a comment in the chat too.
Okay.
It's the last one. It's important to get Democratic majorities back in Congress. We know that for sure. But something may need to be done sooner. I think it's likely that Trump will try to cancel future elections. And I think that assumption is based on everything we see happening today.
Yes.
They're going for the gold.
Yep.
What they think gold is.
Yep.
And I along with that too, I think my concern, because I'll say it this way, my parents were part of the era where they had to pay poll tax to vote. And so I don't hear enough these days. Maybe it's just me, the anxiousness of me wanting to get people registered to vote so they can feel at least that much power. I know rallies and protests are good, but my go-to right now is, what do we need to do to make sure that people still feel empowered to use that vote that could be taken away?
Well, I think we need to educate people about how serious the situation is. And I think, again, I'm going back to influencing public opinion by demonstrations and strikes and yeah, strikes and demonstrations, speeches. Yeah.
And voter registrations at those demonstrations and rallies and things like that has to be ongoing. Otherwise, I mean, I am a proponent of rallies and protests and marches and things like that. But when I come home from those rallies, I've got to have a call to action. That's my personal. And that call to action for me is always leaving that meeting, I mean, those rallies, knowing that I've done something rather than just say, whatever my sign says. I want to have something that's going to be, the folks can go home and say, now I'm going to contact my neighbor and make sure they're voted. I'm going to make sure that they're registered.
Yes,
I want to make
exactly.
sure that the people in their circle check your voter registration, because it's critically important. You think you're registered, you might not be registered anymore. That has to be a constant for the next few years. I think that we've got to be on top of voting, because we can do all this other stuff. And I think it's necessary, like you said, for education. But if we don't get people registered to vote, and not just registered, we're going to have to be more strategic now than ever to make sure they get to the polls.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's where I stand, because I saw this during the civil rights era too. Not all the stuff that's going on now. This is a different chapter in the same playbook. But I remember how people mobilized and got others to register to vote, and we all went together. You know, I was trailing behind my parents. And here we are again. We're going to have people trailing behind us to go to the polls. We're going to have to use our vehicles to get them there.
Yep. Yep, that's very true.
Okay, Casey.
I just wanted to say that I think it has to be both and, right? It's like none of the things alone will work, but all together creating an energy. And I would agree with you about all of that call to action and, you know, holding the sign, except for it seems over the last month or so to me that those growing crowds have put a big piece of energy into the pie that is, I'm mixing all my metaphors, but that will lead to, you know, if people are registered and they don't care enough to go vote, it's irrelevant. And it just seems like that energy needs to be out there of people being outraged. And the more they see, you know, somebody, they drive by and see this protest, it's like, oh, well, what are they upset about? You know, it produces some curiosity and maybe some bravery in other people. And it just feels right now like an important part of the energy that has to go into getting the rest of it done.
Yeah, I think you're speaking the sentiment that John and I had a conversation about that the other day for our indivisible group. And that's basically what he said in summation too. We've got to, the presence has to stay. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, Agnetha.
There. As I was just saying in a comment that I just put in the chat, for a long time I would say, how can people, you know, for example, you know, believe in Trump when they see all the things he does, or how could you know, a group of people that were such a strong following that he had. Then I realized that actually we get our news, most of us here, probably everybody, you know, reads a wide variety of news and sees what's going on. But I really believe there's a lot of people who get such limited news. So even like, for example, I watch stations where they emphasize how many demonstrations there are now and how the people are feeling. But I think there's a number of people, especially Trump followers, that may get such limited news they don't even know what's going on unless they just happen to see it in their community. That worries me, is how to reach people whose news sources are so much more limited.
Yeah, there are movements within our movement. There are people who are emphasizing social media as a way of reaching these people because they get their news from social media. And the more we can make an imprint on that, the more we can reach them because they're not listening to traditional media. Fox News has persuaded them to distrust traditional media. Fox News, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but Fox News went to court on the issue that they had a constitutional right to lie and distort the news, and they won.
Really?
They won because of the fair reporting or fair comment decision. What was that called? Anyway, it was a provision of the FCC, and that was overturned in the 70s. And since then, there is no obligation to tell both sides. There used to be. And Trump at Fox News has just taken that ball and run with it.
John, did you have a question earlier? John?
Yeah, I had one unrelated to this, but I know you're gonna, I two. One, you're gonna talk about, eventually you're gonna talk about executive orders. I had questions there. Second one that was not in executive orders is pardoning part of the Constitution, or is that an add-on that could be easily gotten rid of because I think it's become abused and it should be very limited in scope?
No, there is a right to pardon in the Constitution. That is the power of the presidency.
And been abused, I think, so. Anyway.
Yeah, we could go on and talk about executive orders now if you want.
Okay, we have about really another good maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll start.
Oh,
talking.
we're running to the end of our time already?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh my goodness.
It's been great though.
Okay, well, let me see. Okay, executive orders are permitted. And here's what they can do. I'll tell you what they can do and what they cannot do. They can direct executive branch agencies to do one thing or another. They can establish policies. They can address administrative concerns. They can allocate funds within what Congress has given them. They can declare national emergencies. They can implement international agreements. Here's what they can't do. They cannot create new laws. They cannot override existing laws. They cannot violate constitutional rights. They cannot change the Constitution. They cannot override judicial decisions. And they cannot appropriate new funds. The funds are limited by what Congress appropriates. And they cannot impose new penalties or criminalize conduct that was lawful before. Now, Trump has signed, I think, 200 executive orders. See. There are ways to stop an executive order. There are some checks and balances. Congress could enact a law that reverses what the president has done, provided Congress has the constitutional authority to legislate on that issue. A court can hold that an executive order is unlawful if it violates the Constitution or a federal statute, and any future president can issue a new executive order that rescinds or amends the previous one. So some presidential orders are pretty mundane, like declaring a federal holiday. Others are much more significant. For example, the Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order. FDR issued an executive order to integrate the shipyards and other military contractors. Harry Truman signed an executive order to integrate the military. Lyndon Johnson issued an executive order to impose civil rights obligations on all federal government contractors. And recently, Joe Biden signed an executive order to require every federal agency to find ways to facilitate voter registration. But there have been some bad executive orders in the past. For example, the relocation and internment of Japanese Americans to concentration camps was an executive order. And yeah. So, yeah, that's what I have on executive orders.
Well, thank you, Mary. I'm gonna, I think we're gonna need to end it here for today. But I would like to ask though, and first of all, let me just say this. It's been so educational, a lot of information recall for me. And I must admit to a lot that I just wasn't aware of. So it's been quite educational. And for me, I will have to go back and listen to the recordings and do some on my personal self-study. But I appreciate your time and all the, you put a lot of work into getting the answers for us too. And this is only the beginning. So here's my call to action. And this is for everybody. Are you interested in taking another step in learning more about our government and how it works? Because I feel like if we don't take up the mantle now and run with it, we're going to be just left to consume what's in the news. Are there voices out there in this platform today who would like to have like a roundtable discussion? You take one part, you take another part, and we come back together and really share this information and help Mary out some. I really would like for Mary to stay on as a lead, but I do believe that we could do, and the reason I'm saying that is we all live in different states, right? And I heard some state-related questions today. So if you could bring some information about your state, I would bring it about my state. And we can collaborate and see just how connected is this information that we're talking about. Civics 101 is going to affect all of us, but what's going on in your state though? What can you do to mobilize people and really help them understand? We're saying, how do we get the information out? It's going to be through us. How can we do that? Some of you guys are in California. Some of you are in Illinois. Some of you are in Arizona, Colorado, Texas. We're all different states, but collectively we do a lot together. But what do we not do that's the same? So where's my panel? Where's the round table? I'm looking at faces. Okay, Aganita has her hand up. Our next meeting actually is May 18th. So you have less than a month to come together. I know it's a big commitment. It's a big ask. But I believe this kind of information sharing needs to go on. Okay, I see Abby. Kenneth says sure. Let's see who else has come on board here. Amanda says we have to know as much as we can so that we can fight whatever's happening. That is exactly, we could close out the session today with that comment. All right. Claire says absolutely. All right, so I believe you guys all have access to our anti-racist email. So what I'm going to do is send you an email. And then if you are committed, let me know. And I'll collaborate more with Mary for the next session. Okay. I mean, communication, we've got to get it. We've got to talk. And I heard someone say too, that we are not, we're not self-educating enough. I'll put it that way. We're not self-educating enough, and we're leaving it up to reaction rather than proaction. And I want to be us to be proactive about moving forward with our own understanding of how the government works, so that when we're at the rallies or when we're getting people registered to vote, they're going to ask us the question, why? Why should I vote? Why should I go to the next rally? So we need to give them an answer other than, well, I just think we need to be out there.
Yeah.
That's a good answer, but what can we really say? Why? Why? This is our nation, right? It says the preamble of the Constitution, we the people. We got to be part of that process. We the people.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention, just on an upbeat note, Trump is greatly underwater on every measure of his presidency. He's underwater on everything now.
So this is prime time for us to get out there then, if he's underwater.
When you say underwater, what do you mean, in a polling sense or approval sense?
The polls are going against him, 52 to 38, 51% disapprove. Disapprovals are in the 50s and upper 40s on a whole bunch of measures. I don't have them right in front of me. But if you look at the polls, he's not getting anywhere. Although he still has the dedicated Trumpers who think this is, quote, exciting. But that's only like 38% of the country are dedicated Trumpers. But they are holding firm.
Which leads us back to voter registration and expanding the vote that protests against him.
Oh, by the way, on the subject of voter registration, join Field Team 6.
Yes.
Which registers likely Democrats. All the other voter registration people take a random sample. Field Team SIP identifies people as likely Democrats because they own a non-Tesla electric vehicle, because they patronize some other entertainment form or buy some other product or live in a certain area or in some way are likely Democrats. And so you've got a much more effective rate to do that. And you can register or you can send registration notices to text them for free to about 125 people a day.
Yeah. I've actually text with Mary on that team too, and they're phenomenal. The training is absolutely spot on also. So it's a really good, and they're like during the election season, I think they were doing that every single day.
Oh yeah, this is year round. Every day we do this.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? We're right at 1:27.
I wanted to say thank you to Mary. I second what Miss Evelyn said about jogging my memory on a lot of stuff and learning a lot of stuff. And it's just, I just had this conversation with my daughter's school, like civics people. So thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad you liked it. I haven't taught since 1997. Haven't taught law since 1997.
Well, you still have your chops up. You sound great, Mary. It was excellent.
That's right. That's right, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Mary, I will be in contact with you via Slack and make sure that our next date is okay with your time. And we'll just continue this for next month then, if that's okay with you guys. We've got to have the discussion. Yeah. I mean, I'm eager now because I want to share with other people too. For example, I have my youngest grandson is 21, and he told me the other day, I sent him, I guess in January, a Civics 101 the website for Senator Day O'Connor. And he told me, I didn't even ask. He told me, he said, I'm beginning to read this and I'm beginning to understand. But he's 21. He didn't have civics in high school. So it's up to me, it's up to all of us to share the information of those that we know so that they can become more educated about what's going on in our nation. So I
It was
appreciate
you sent him again, Sandra Day
Senator,
O'Connor?
it's in, the Institute actually is in Arizona, Senator Day O'Connor, Civics 101.
It's the O'Connor Institute.org.
Mhm.
Thank you.
It's really good. Got lots of resources and a lot of, they're like courses that come in 5-minute bites. You know, you take a little bit of a course for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something, and it adds up, and they keep track of what you've done so you're not doing the same thing again and again.
Absolutely. And there's a test involved. So I know my style of preparing for a test. It might not be your style, but it's easy tests though. The tests are easy. But it's just fun to think, oh my gosh, I'm continuing to learn because I don't know everything. And then when I learn, I want to pass it on. You're like, pay it forward. Yeah. So thank you guys and have a great afternoon and I will be in touch.
Thank you, Miss Evelyn. It was great.
Thank you, Sandy. And thank you so much, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
My pleasure.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.